interesting. I've always looked at, people say, if our objective is to close the racial wealth divide, are you succeeding? And it's a tricky conversation. So we sort of look at the impact of our work at 3 levels, 2 of which we know how to measure and 1 of which we don't. So when we invest in any particular enterprise in our portfolio, and we're going through that analysis of what's the demographic profile of the ownership of that company? What types of good jobs are they creating? What is their environmental footprint? What kind of worker power are they generating? We can measure how much is any one company in our portfolio having an impact on its workers and its environment. We can also measure the aggregate impact of our portfolio over time. So with our first fund, which was a $7 million fund that ran from 2017, we had a pilot fund 2013 to 2017 that we tested $3 million across 30 different enterprises. And then fund 1, small $7 million fund. These are small because you're investing, $50,000 to $250,000, putting injections of capital where no one else will deploy it. So we had, nearly 70% of the portfolio owned by entrepreneur founders and entrepreneurs of color, about over 30% that was worker owned, nearly 80% are paying at or above a living wage. Other criteria like noticing that if we go back to 2018, only 34 Black women founders had ever raised more than $1 million in venture capital, right? So they were being overlooked for so many structural reasons. 3 of those came out of our portfolio, being the first money in on companies that are not having a shot, and they've all now raised multiple rounds of capital, are growing successfully. And again, there's good news in some of the growth that went up from 34 in 2018 to 350 in 2020, and it's still an absurd drop in a bucket for a demographic of entrepreneurs that have been very successful when they do finally get support. So we can measure direct impact on enterprises and on our portfolio. What we can't do is do a longitudinal study in Boston around how is the wealth gap changing. So many people heard that terrible statistic a number of years ago of the median net worth for a white family in Boston being $247,000 and the median net worth of a Black family being $8. And that came from the Boston Fed, did that study, and they are doing an upgrade. So now maybe we will find out how the effect of the Boston Impact Initiative and other allied friends and partners like the Boston Ujima Project that we helped give birth to, and other partners in the Boston, greater Boston area and across Massachusetts that have really focused on supporting entrepreneurs of color. What's critical when you ask about what progress has been made so far is also to take a look at this underlying belief, right? We have an objective of our fund is to reduce inequality. And that does mean turning some traditional aspects of investing and even impact investing on its head, right? So we've talked already about flipping the risk and return ratio, which means centering the definition of financial risk on those who can least afford to take it, and centering the definition of financial return on those who need the most return, which means for us, not just on the deployment side of our capital, making fair and equitable terms to entrepreneurs, which I'll come back to, but also on raising capital. So we have non-accredited investors, community-based investors that can invest in our fund. And these are folks that are not wealthy. They don't have a lot of resources and they cannot afford a lot of risk. So instead of the more risk you take, the more return you get, the way we do it is we say, the more at risk you are, the more return you should get and the more you should be de-risked. So we put community investors at the top of our capital stack. They are senior to everyone else. In Fund 2, which we just launched last quarter, which is a $20 million fund, they get a 5-year 5% return, followed by a 5-year 7% return on a note if they renew, whereas our accredited investors get a 10-year 3% and our philanthropic investors get a 10-year 1%. And they're followed by recoverable grants and grants. And so that means, like, how do we make sure that we're using the capital structure at BII to be fundamentally redistributive? On the other side, on the deployment side, we deploy integrated capital, equity, debt, and grants, every tool that we can. Fund one was 75% debt and 25% equity. Now there's been a lot of shift in the marketplace that's been for good of more lenders supporting equitable lending practices. So we're focusing more on equity this time. When we lend at 5 to 7%, even despite the inflationary environment that we're in. And when we do equity investing, we do structured exits. We want to cap our equity returns, and we somewhere between 1.5 and 3x, because we want the owners and the workers to benefit from the surpluses that they generate. So it's really critical that we make these shifts around inequality. And I know that addresses a major topic that people struggle with around impact investing, doing well by doing good. You don't have to be a concessionary. You can get market rate returns. That may be true. But if the core concern that you hold is inequality, then making market rate returns for your wealthy investors by definition generates inequality, because it means they're growing their wealth faster than those who are receiving the investment, especially if you have workers as part of the ownership class. And so we really have to ask that question of like, how do we ensure that the design of these funds, and that's what I think Boston Impact Initiative is trying to pilot, that the design of impact investing funds is reducing inequality, not amplifying it.